Summer concerts, pool parties, chill nights under the stars. We're stocking up our closet so you're ready to look your best for all of it. At Plato's Closet in West Ashley and North Charleston, we're buying all things summer. So bring in your tees, tote bags, sandals, sunglasses, and more. We pay cash on the spot for gently loved name brand looks. Plato's Closet is the go-to destination for trend-forward teens and young adults who support local and shop sustainable. Visit Plato's Closet today. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
The spectre of disease causes untold mayhem, anguish, and desolation. The extent to which the spectre has yielded its power, however, has been massively curtailed in the past century. To understand how this has been accomplished, we must understand the science and mathematics of epidemiology. Epidemiology is the field of study related to how disease unfolds in a population. So how has epidemiology improved our lives? What have we learned from it? And what can we do to learn more from it? All this and more on this episode of Breaking Math. Episode 25, Pandemic Panic. I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Gabriel.
And welcome to Breaking Math. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/breakingmathpodcast.
Mm-hmm. Also, we are on Twitter at Breaking Math Pod.
And we're on Facebook, Gmail, as Breaking Math Podcast. And we have our website, breakingmathpodcast.com. So what are we going to be talking about today?
Today is all about epidemiology, and today we have a very interesting story about why we chose this episode. Jonathan, want to tell us a bit about the inspiration for this episode?
Sure. I got very sick in late January, early February, so I had to go to the hospital for a couple weeks. And one of the things that I noticed about the hospital right away was everything worked like clockwork, and that's of course is an organization. They have reasons for operating like clockwork. That's not an observation in and of itself, but it led me to observe when it comes to infection, everybody was doing things like washing their hands, and it made me think, why are we doing this? I mean, I know why we're doing this, but in a system where things breed, like the Lotka-Volterra model that we talked about on episode 3, where you have rabbits and foxes, the foxes eat the rabbits, the foxes starve, all that kind of stuff. You can listen to it. You have a lot of complicated math that goes along with that. And that one thing led to another, and that led to this episode on epidemiology.
It's always very interesting when something very personal can be used as inspiration for this episode or for this podcast. We've always talked about how mathematics permeates all aspects of our lives. So I like how you can use things like your hospital stay and talk about the mathematics of hospitals and how we improve our daily lives.
Oh, yeah. And as far as an improvement to my daily life goes and your daily life, and probably everybody who's listening because they have an internet connection has been impacted by this, is we don't die all the time anymore. And the rate of infectious disease reached its about more or less its current point back in the 50s,
yes.
From a very high rate.
Yeah.
And my dad, back in the mid-40s, got yellow fever, and that was a common thing to happen back then, because people just died left and right of childhood illnesses all the time because viruses are brutal and children are weak.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Now, real quickly, yeah, you had mentioned earlier about modern medicine. Would you say, in some sense, that modern medicine goes back to ancient Greece with Hippocrates?
I would say that modern medicine. I would say that in as much as modernity can be traced back to modern Greece, yes. Hippocrates did some pretty neat things. One of the most important things what he did was assume that disease has a natural cause, instead of blaming people for their diseases, like was common back in the day. And not only did he do that, but he experimented. And then experimentation got better, of course, in the Renaissance era, and then the Enlightenment era, and then the modern era, and here we are today.
Yeah, and one of the things that really fascinates me is both culture as well as science and empiricism and mathematics, because even to this day we have very strong elements of culture that permeate our thinking. I'm talking as a whole. I'm not just talking about, say, in Western medicine, but people seem to be really emotionally tied to ideas in medicine that are not mathematical. I'm talking about like, well,
one example of that is just in our value of pride itself. Surgeons still, by and large, refuse to use a checklist, even though math and statistics shows us that using a checklist reduces the amount of errors by a lot. They think they're above that. And it's still hard for hospitals to get doctors to wash their hands when they should.
That's crazy. Wow. So pride is an element. No, that absolutely makes sense, man. So we sometimes are still our own worst enemy, or in our own evolution, we still haven't conquered all of our issues. Anyways, this episode, not to go too far on a tangent, this episode, of course, is to be firmly about mathematics and medicine.
Oh yeah, mathematics. Well, not necessarily medicine, but mathematics and disease. Paxi, we're going to talk a lot about what medicine can do, but we'll see. And we have a new segment on the show.
That's right. This new segment we are currently calling Asking Math, where essentially, how would you describe it, Jonathan?
You have a question about math or mathy things, send it to us, and we'll see if we can answer it. If we don't, then we'll ignore you.
No, actually, I look forward to this. This is an opportunity to interact with you as a listener, and also this keeps us on our toes. This gives us a chance to really dig into our own research. We're going to learn a lot with this. Now, what's interesting is, I don't know how many of y'all spend a lot of time researching on internet forums, but people can sometimes be right, sometimes they can be partially right, and sometimes they can get really flamed when they are partially right. I understand that can happen. I'd like to think that for me personally, I will be very open about it when I've been corrected. It's just exciting for me because it's a chance to really delve into mathematical questions for our benefit and for your benefit.
And it's also a way to get to know our audience better. You guys have done a good thing for us by giving us a platform and helping us get the message about certain mathematical concepts out to the world. And in return, we'd like to know more about you and your interests.
Yeah, so please send us your breaking math questions. And currently, I think email is probably the best way. You can also send it to us on Facebook.
Yeah, and again, that email is breakingmathpodcast@gmail.com, and that Facebook address is facebook.com/breakingmathpodcast. Today on Breaking Math, we're going to talk a little bit at first with the history of the study of disease and epidemiology.
We're then going to get into modeling epidemics.
We're going to talk a few examples of those models and how to use them. So the first person we're going to talk about, his name was John Grant, and he was a haberdasher.
That is a really fun word to say. I did not know what that meant before about 10 minutes ago. For those who are not familiar, Jonathan, do you want to explain what a haberdasher is?
A haberdasher in the United States is someone who is a purveyor of men's clothing, and in England is a purveyor of sewing goods. So back in the 1600s, during which John Grant was alive, maybe it was a mashup of either one. I didn't want to delve too far into the haberdashery angle of this guy's life because it's not the main part of his life.
Sorry, I go on tangents a lot. Okay, that'd be the last we hear of the haberdasher part.
Haberdasher. But he was also an author. The plague broke out in the 1660s, and because of the plague, there's a lot of renewed interest in public health. He was an author of a book that talked about how to do that, but he also did some concrete research. His book was never put into effect, and he created the first life table.
Wow. John Gaunt, haberdasher, author, mathematician.
And what is a life table?
Life table. So this is very interesting. This actually is a table where you take a population of people and you talk about how many of them are expected to die in a given time interval.
Yeah, and
Now, actually, during the research, didn't we pulled up one of his life tables
oh yeah, we did, and it's pretty shocking.
for our listeners. Why don't we read to you some of the more salient parts of this life table?
So right off the bat, the infant mortality rate was really high, obviously in the 1600s, and 36% of the population would die by age 6.
Right, out of this little this table here, it says right here, of 100, as you just said, 36 die within the first 6 years. And then it says in the next 10 years, 24 more die. And then after
So that's 50 already. 50% of the population dies by age 16.
Yeah. And then the next 10 years, you have 15 more die.
We're at 65% of the population dying by age 24.
Mm-hmm. And then the next third one, by age 34, you have 9 more deaths.
Yeah, then 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. And a lot of people think that we didn't live past 30. We totally lived past 30. It's just that if you didn't live past age 6, you probably, if you live past age 6, you're probably going to make it pretty far. But yeah, but that's the reason why the life expectancy is low, and actually is lowered in the United States right now because of obesity and the opiate epidemic. So this is dark stuff that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're dealing with a grim specter.
Yeah, totally. In fact, I was just talking to Jonathan during the planning of this episode, and we had talked about this guy here, John Grant, and we're wondering if perhaps he was depressed with all this, with all the mathematics and tallying of death.
Well, what I thought of it is just from what I've read, people who study actuarial science, there's actually whole websites devoted to actuarial science and on mortuary science, and there's a lot of crossover in tone. And I do believe that the same type of people who bury and take care of our deceased are the same type of people who study our deceased mathematically.
Mm-hmm. And isn't there a case where, in terms of the perception, in terms of societal perceptions of death, following a very significant plague, there's an increase in executions?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, after any plague, there's a big spike in executions, and because the theory is when death is so prevalent, the feeling of death is devalued for the living.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, no matter how you slice it, death certainly is part of life and is very, very worthy of study.
Calculating who survives and who dies runs into statistics, and that's a big theme in epidemiology, is statistical models. So let's say in London, there's an outbreak at a specific hospital and of swine flu or something worse than swine flu, and we want to see what's going to happen. We create what's called a mathematical model, and it doesn't have several million variables. There's not a variable for each person. There's not a variable for each germ. You simplify, and you simplify using mathematical instinct, but also you use statistics to guide you. And statistics was created from gambling and death.
Gambling and death. Interesting how you pair those two together.
Yeah, so if you don't like, studying stats right now, then just you have an excuse because you don't like gambling or death.
It's worth noting these life tables were and are still used for insurance policies.
Yeah, if you take out a life insurance policy, it costs more if you start that when you're older, because there's a bigger chance you're going to die sooner, so the insurance company has less time to make money to pay off and less time to crooks, but yeah. As we've mentioned, the seeds of epidemiology, John Grant's research and John Grant's book, which is about public health, have been tied since the very beginning. And with our next person, we'll see that too.
Yeah, so moving down about a century and a half, 2 centuries, we have Jon Snow. Where have I heard that name before?
I think he's on the Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly. He was an actual real guy. Want to tell us a little bit about Mr. Jon Snow?
Oh yeah. He is really the father of epidemiology, or he's currently considered to be the father of epidemiology because he in 1854 graphed deaths on a map. That's all he did, but it was a massive step in the right direction. Broad Street, part of Soho in London, had an outbreak in 1854 of cholera, during which 616 people died. And if you recall, Louis Pasteur wouldn't do his research for like another 20 years or so. So miasma versus germ theory was still up in the air. And this was another notch in the right direction of germ theory, because he proved that cholera was spread through water. Because if you look at the dots on the map, and you can find this on the Wikipedia article about Jon Snow, they're all clustered around sources of water.
Interesting. Yes, that's a really good way of studying a phenomena that may not be well understood at a given time. It's just seeing where things happen. Now, that's not to be confused with the fact that correlation does not always equal causation, but in this case, it was certainly very successful.
Oh yeah, I mean, with all science, what we're doing is we have a model in our head of how the universe works. We take the model of how the actual universe works, which is just the universe. We compare the two and we reevaluate, and it's amazing how well that works. It's kind of bizarre sometimes.
And also for our listeners who may not be aware of this, can you talk a little bit about what miasma is?
Miasma is air that smells bad. That miasmic is used to describe air that smells bad, but people thought that caused disease. If you've ever seen a plague doctor mask, it looks like a leather bird's mask, and those were filled with potpourri and used by plague doctors because they thought that good smelling air would cancel out bad smelling air.
Wow! It's so fascinating how far we've gone. And of course, I always like to say this: we are not at the epitome of knowledge that we know of. There's so much happening now that I'm sure in 100 years we'll look back and think, wow, why did they believe that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always things that we need to improve upon, and I think with knowledge a lot of times it's like trying to drain a lake. So the first thing you could do is get giant buckets, but then then the bucket gets unwieldy, so you use a spoon, and the spoon gets unwieldy, so you take some paper towels and you pat the bottom of the lake dry. So the lake gets drier and drier, but it's approaching something, and I feel like that's what we do with science.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. So, just before we move on, can we talk more about the effect that Jon Snow and his research had on treating the disease for London as a whole?
Well, it put an importance on identifying sources of dirty water. His recommendations for what to do, however, were not put in place until after his death, and by then a lot of the stuff was already suggested by other sources. So unfortunately, because like we've said before, England in the past had an issue with modernization, and they did things like keep bank records on notched sticks, and I can't remember the other thing that we talked about on a previous episode, but in this case, and in the case of John Grant, did not put their recommendations into effect for many years. So now we're going to get into the late modern era.
Yeah, so I think one of the first people who we are going to talk about for this section is a certain Dr. Janet Lane Clapon.
Dr. Lane Clapon was remarkable for her time. She had a PhD and an MD, what's called a double doctor, and she pioneered the use of cohort studies in epidemiology. And remember, this is only about 50, 60 years after Jon Snow did his research, so it was still pretty new. I mean, this is the time that Einstein was doing his stuff, the time that World War I was about to break out. So it was quite a while ago. Yeah. And cohort studies are when you do a cross-sectional study at time intervals. And a cross-sectional study is when you do a study of a population, a cross-section of the population at a discrete point in time.
So is this in any way related to how control groups are used in research?
It is, and the relation between cohort studies and control groups is a little bit out of the scope of this episode, unfortunately, and we will do an episode on statistics. We promise you stats fans that. And the reason why this is so useful in epidemiology is because if you think about a virus or a bacteria, what it does is it spreads. And if it spreads, then you want to know how it's changing, because if its main action is something that happens over time, you have to study what happens over time. And it was a obvious step, like any genius step is, but revolutionary, like any genius step is.
So yeah, let's talk about some of her cohort studies and what effect they had on society.
Oh yeah, so there's debate at the time whether or not cows or breast milk was better for babies. So she divided the babies into two groups, or cohort studies, and fed one with cow's milk and one with breast milk. And the ones who were fed breast milk got heavier. And she used the statistical methods that she pioneered, and this is the reason why she used a cohort study. And the cohort study is more expensive than other types of studies sometimes, but it's much more reliable in certain ways. And she was able to establish that these results were unlikely to occur because of a fluke or because of confounding, such as something other than the type of milk being responsible for the difference in weight.
I'm sure there's plenty of other examples of confounding that ruins studies, but yeah, you made the point pretty well, I think.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about disease vectors. And a disease vector is just something that carries disease into an organism.
So in this case, we clearly are not talking about a vector in the sense of something that has a direction and a magnitude. All we're talking about is a method of a delivery vehicle. This is not the mathematical definition of a vector.
No, yeah. A vector simply means carrier or transporter. You can see how it applies to arrows, and you can see how it applies to disease. It's a very vague word.
So what's the official definition of vector?
The official definition of a vector is something that carries a disease into an organism. It's the delivery thing. So let's say it could be, for example, mosquitoes could be a vector, or the vector could be something like a flea, or a vector could be simple as snot.
Oh yeah, even mucus when you sneeze at work. That's a vector.
And this is kind of a nebulous definition because it's the quote-unquote intermediate one. And where do you draw the line of intermediate? Is the lake a vector because mosquitoes breed in lakes? Traditionally, no. So we really have to understand that a vector, in it, almost like the mathematical version of a vector, is something that can be simplified very strongly without removing any of its useful information. So you can model it as a number, basically.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, who was the researcher who introduced the idea of disease vectors?
The researcher who really did a lot of research on vectors with respect to malaria was a British man called Ronald Ross. Everybody's been British so far, except for I'm not sure if Janet Lane Clapin was. A concrete example of how he discovered a vector is he let these mosquitoes that were uninfected suck on this guy Hussein Khan's blood, who is in Sukharabad in India. And inside these mosquitoes, he found these round cells that were not part of the mosquito cells because they didn't look anything like animals, like insect cells. And he was so excited by his discovery that he wrote this poem.
This day, relenting God hath placed within my hand a wondrous thing, and God be praised. At his command, seeking his secret deeds, with tears and toiling breath, I find thy cunning seeds. O million murdering death, I know this little thing a myriad men will save. O death, where is thy sting? Thy victory, O grave.
And this is an example where you don't need test tubes and stuff to
Summer concerts, pool parties, chill nights under the stars. We're stocking up our closet so you're ready to look your best for all of it. At Plato's Closet in West Ashley and North Charleston, we're buying all things summer. So bring in your tees, tote bags, sandals, sunglasses, and more. We pay cash on the spot for gently loved name brand looks. Plato's Closet is the go-to destination for trend-forward teens and young adults who support local and shop sustainable. Visit Plato's Closet today. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
I mean, you need test tubes, I guess, to find the vector inside of the mosquito or whatever. But what I mean is, you use a malaria net to decrease the spread of malaria by a lot. Malaria, like many of you know, is the primary historical killer of humans, and this just shows how. Again, this is the third time you mentioned it, but how important epidemiology really is. And I don't think it's political to say that when we responded to terrorism by decreasing the amount of effort that we put into eradicating polio in Afghanistan, that we're doing the world a grave disservice.
Absolutely. So, although disease vectors themselves are not mathematical, we certainly do get very mathematical in recent models of epidemics. So in this next segment, we're going to talk about some mathematical models of epidemics. And the first thing we are going to talk about is what's called a basic reproduction number. This is something that was found by a gentleman by the name of George MacDonald in 1952, actually.
And it's a really simple concept, and you'll see why in just a second. The basic reproduction number of a virus or bacteria or whatever is the number of new cases that a case generates on average. So if you're sick, how many people get sick because of you on average? And if less than one person gets sick on average, then the disease will die out. If more than one person gets sick on average, then the disease will live on and eventually take over the entire population. And the truth is a little bit between these two, but for fast epidemics, this number, the basic reproduction number, and we're going to call it R0 from now on because that's what it's called in the literature, is very useful.
So let's think of an example here then. We've got something like tuberculosis. So if tuberculosis can either cultivate slowly or quickly via different processes, then its total reproduction number is the sum of the base reproduction numbers. That is to say, R0 is equal to the fast R0 added to the slow R0.
And really, it's not that surprising, because if you have different ways that a disease can proliferate, then it's going to try all of them. So the number of people who you're going to infect is the sum of all of those. And that's the basic logic behind it. I know that is not a one-to-one correlation.
Yeah. In the example of tuberculosis, how does it spread slowly and how does it spread quickly?
I think it has to do with the way that the disease progresses. So if the disease progresses slowly, you calculate that number, and we'll show you how to calculate the base reproduction number in just a second. And if it proliferates quickly, then it's a different. If it goes quickly, then it's a different one, and it's just different expressions of the same disease. And so you might wonder why these aren't weighted by like something. So why isn't it like the average of the fast and the slow one? And the reason is simply because the number of total tuberculosis cases is already a sum of the fast and slow method that is progressing, so we don't need to weight it again.
We said that in the example of tuberculosis, R0 is equal to R0 fast plus R0 slow. Well, let's talk about what R0 actually is. There's an equation where R0 is described as beta over gamma, where beta is the contact rate, and in the case of disease, a contact rate would be what?
So the beta is the contact rate, obviously, which is the rate at which a disease creates new diseases, and gamma, which is the infectious period, is which is how long a disease is infectious for. So is it infectious for 2 weeks, like measles? Is it infectious for like years, like in the case of HIV? That's what that is.
Cool. Okay.
And to give you some examples of basic reproduction numbers, Ebola, which is known for burning itself out real fast, like a toddler or something, has an R0 of 2, but measles has an R0 of 15, and measles is known for spreading extremely quickly. And Ebola doesn't have a lower one because if it's below 1, like we said, it's non-viable.
Yeah. So as this was introduced,
So the takeaway of this is that we have a number, and if we can make that number less than 1, then we kill off the disease like we do with smallpox. And there's ways that we can deal with viruses. I mean, like what?
Well, 3 ways that we have are quarantine, where one who is infected is isolated from other people as to not spread the disease. Also sanitation, which of course is just cleanliness. And then finally we've got vaccines.
And you'll notice that all 3 of these affect the beta number, the rate at which a disease can spread. Because with sanitation, you have less bacteria sitting around, so there's less of that. With quarantine, the bacteria have nowhere to go, and with vaccines, the bacteria have nothing to do, or they just get eaten up by white blood cells. Or I don't know if that's how viruses are eaten in the body, but yeah. Now, one model that's pretty widely used because it's pretty simple, but can be used in conjunction with other models to create very complex and nuanced models, is called the SIR model. and that stands for susceptible, infected, and recovered.
Now, this is a differential equation, isn't that right?
Yeah, and we're going to talk about what that means in just a second, but just so you're not lost, susceptible are people who haven't gotten the disease yet and they're not immune to it. Infected are the people who are infected, and recovered are the people who are it's pretty self-explanatory now that I think about it. And we talked about differential equations before, but this model that we have here, the SIR model, might be a very good way of actually explaining it if you had the background that we just gave you for epidemiology. So we have SI and R, which are the numbers of people who are, susceptible, infected, and recovered. And then we have S prime, I prime, and R prime. And we're going to call these, and prime just means rate of change. So we're going to use the word rate of change from now on. Mm-hmm. And what's a rate of change?
It's the rate with which something changes. Sorry.
It is pretty basic, and you basically what this is if I go a certain amount of distance a certain amount of time, that's a rate of change. And S prime, I prime, and R prime are technically what are called infinitesimal rates of change. So this is for a car, what you'd see on your speedometer. That's your infinitesimal rate of change. That's with respect to time. Or increase in distance over unit of time. Increase in speed over unit of time would be acceleration. So now, obviously, we have susceptible individuals, right?
Yes.
And we got infected individuals. So what is the relationship between susceptible individuals and susceptible, infected, and recovered individuals?
So this is interesting. So as we said, susceptible is S and infected individuals is I. We know that S, or susceptible individuals, become I, or infected individuals. Basically, S is going to go down as I increases. Also, infected individuals we know will eventually, or some of them at a given rate, will become recovered individuals. So I becomes R, I goes down as R increases.
And you'll notice that S can only go down, R can only go up, but I can go either down or up. So if there's more people getting infected than are recovering, then I prime, the rate of change in I, is positive. Otherwise, it's negative or zero. Every day, a fraction of infected individuals turn into recovered individuals. So let's say a disease is like measles and it runs for 2 weeks. So what percentage of the population is going to be turned into recovered individuals every day if the disease lasts 2 weeks?
So it would be 1/14 then.
Yeah, 1 day out of 14 days. And by the way, recovered here also means dead. So if you die from measles, you're technically recovered from measles, which is funny.
Yeah. So then to expand that, the rate at which susceptible people turns into infected people is dependent on both the susceptible population and the infected population, since this is a statistical average of interactions between people.
The way that you could think about this is, let's say I have 1,000 people who are infected and 1,000 people who are susceptible. If the interactions are perfectly random, for every person in the susceptible group, there's 1,000 people in the infected group. So there's 1 million different interactions that could happen with equal probability in this model. And for those of you who keep track of the math, these are the two equations. R prime equals BI, where B is the rate of change of R with respect to I. And S prime is equal to negative A times S times I. And we're going to keep the equation here because this is a simple version. Normally, you do have to keep into account the number of the whole population.
This leaves I prime, or the rate of change of infected people, is equal to A times S times I minus B times I.
Yeah, so we have 3 different equations that govern this system. And we put together a little program that just kind of shows you how sensitive these variables are. So we're going to run it with, and we're going to use a slightly different equation, which you can find on the Facebook page. So let's say, all right, so what is the initial unsick population, the initial susceptible population?
So the initial unsick population, let's do a nice large sum. How about 15,000?
All right, 15,000 people who are not sick yet. How many people are sick?
Ooh, how about let's start small. I want to say 33.
33 people, and let's say no people have recovered yet. What's the chance that this disease spreads between a random contact between two people?
How about 0.5%? So if this person in decimal 0.005.
And how long does this disease incubate for?
Oh, how about 8 days?
8 days. And by incubate, I meant how long is it, susceptible? How long is it infectious for? And we're going to run that simulation over the course of a year. After a year, it looks like 373 people have gotten sick total, but the number of people who are actually sick has gone down to 7. So this disease is going to die off.
Oh, okay. Yay.
But look what happens when you change it from 0.5% to 5%.
Okay.
Oh, wait, not much.
Sorry. Well, no, this disease just isn't really that detrimental.
Yeah, so let's see if half of the people. Okay, now everybody dies.
Okay, sorry. We just had to tweak the numbers a little bit.
Nah, so but that's one of the numbers that you could tweak with, and sometimes you change it very slightly, and it makes a huge difference. But let's see what changing the rate. So let's say it's not infectious for 8 days. Let's say it's infectious for a whole month, 31 days. Mm-hmm. It's about the same, honestly.
Yeah. Wow. Goodness. So I wonder what our magic numbers are here then.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the ways that you slice this, it is not a very deadly disease that we designed. So let's boost the number of people that you start out with to a third of 1,000.
Okay, very good.
After a year, it infects a bunch of people, but the number of sick people has gone down, and after 3 years. It's gone down further, but only to 61. After 10 years, about a third of the population has gotten it, and there's still sick people. So the disease dies off painfully slowly with these parameters. But let's see what happens when we make it a little bit less infectious. So instead of 2.5%, let's make it 0.25%. So in that case, about only a fifth of the population has been infected by this, but it's going down stubbornly slowly.
Oh, wow. Okay, and again, these are just arbitrary numbers that we just made up on the spot. So,
yeah,
it'd be interesting to run this simulation a few times and to figure out what are the key numbers here.
Now, if we bumped up the probability that an infection is 1 out of 20 times, then about 2/3 of the population gets sick over time. And if you give it unrestrained growth, so instead of 15,000, 150,000, you have still 2/3 of the population that are, even though we started with the exact same amount. In fact, if we decrease the number of people from 333 to 33, however, when we decrease the number of people from 333 to 33, instead of 100,000 people dying or getting sick, you only have about 5,000 out of the whole 150,000. So that's a very touchy number right there. So reducing the amount of sick people by quarantining them is very effective in controlling disease. And this is just something that you study when you study disease.
One of the things that's interesting is how we can apply the same mathematics that describe viruses as other things, like things in culture that go viral. As you know, in this podcast, we have a fascination with language and culture as well as mathematics. And one of the aspects of language and culture that we can talk about are memes.
And I mean, we're talking specifically in this case about the memes that you get from Facebook that have the pictures and text on them for one simple reason: to simplify the model and make it so that inoculation can be not inoculation, so that being resistant to a virus can be a thing. So we're equating memes and viruses here. So what do memes get? They get boring. Can you think of a meme from like 2 years ago or something?
Oh gosh, I'm sure there's a graveyard of all of the old memes where memes go to die. Like the I don't know if you all recall this one but the Ermagerd girl.
Oh yeah, that was so long ago. Actually, it wasn't even that long ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Check it out. I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to type in old memes and see what comes up. That's all I'm typing. Old memes.
cutting edge mathematical research here on Breaking Math.
Yes. Well, there's the 100 greatest memes of all time. You can look that up. And let's see. Let's take a jog down memory lane here. Okay. Oh yeah, like this guy, like the Dos Equis guy. Is he still around? Is he still?
I haven't seen that in a meme in forever. So you get the point. Memes get boring over time. You've seen a meme, it's funny for a little bit, then it doesn't get boring. So now we're going to define SI and R in terms of memes. So what's S?
Susceptible population. So obviously this is anybody, and of course if you've got something hot like a cute cat, I think we are all susceptible to that because deep in our brains we all think cats are cute.
Yeah, and so S is the people who haven't seen the meme. Next we have infected individuals. And so those are the people who have a risk of transmitting the meme. So those are people who have seen the meme and aren't bored of it yet, right?
Sure, yeah. So that means they are probably, and again, in this case, obviously the meme doesn't affect them aside from bringing some enjoyment into their otherwise mundane and lonely life. So they've seen the meme and they are motivated to press like and or share.
Yeah, or they're the type of people who could press like or share. Not even, so if your grandma has seen a meme and she's within the period of time where that meme could be funny, maybe she just doesn't find it funny. Like some people are just naturally immune to certain viruses. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could go on and on with the parallels here.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then R are the people who recovered from the meme, and I'm calling it recovering because you do have to recover from the meme.
Yeah, so that's at the point where you're no longer going to like and share.
Yeah, you're gonna hate it. You're going to hate it.
Sort of like songs as well that get really old. You're no longer enjoying them.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, for those of you in the audience who aren't under 35, just replace meme with song, and everything we said makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about A and B before in the equations. So A is the probability that if someone shares a meme with you, that you will remember that meme. And B is the inverse of the lifespan of the meme. So how long the meme is intrinsically funny for before it gets old. With this, you could track the spread of social media and make predictions about social media. And in fact, people do this. It's big money right now. So like with anything in math and in science, but especially in math, one discovery can be applied to so many different things.
What's also fascinating is I find memes are also, there's some degree of a barrier in memes with respect to age. I took note of this back when I was a kindergarten teacher. I had a lot of kindergartners come in after recess and tell me very excitedly that they had discovered Indian clay. Now, I realize that name may not be very sensitive. I'm sharing this as a fact of what they told me. That was a term that when I was in kindergarten I had used, and at the time I thought that's what it was actually called. But it made me surprised that term is still being passed around in the kindergarten age level. Oh
yeah, there is definitely a barrier, and it could be incorporated by the model technically, it is incorporated by the model technically by the model's own standards. So if most people over 35, like I said, aren't going to share memes, or if people under 35 aren't going to, then transmission rates are just going to be different. But as as you've seen in personal experience, by just sharing memes, you have an insight into the way that epidemiology works, and it doesn't work like that. And with things like sexually transmitted diseases, there's a huge limitation on age ranges and things like that, and just so many different factors. So the good point that you brought up there.
Interesting. Wow. And there's so much with our conscious experience that can be described via virology. This seems like it could be a continuing conversation even into future episodes.
Yeah, as many of you can see, there's limitations to SIR theory, but it's not the end of the world. And like any model, it doesn't give you full information about the world and doesn't fully represent the world. So graph theory is used a lot in studying epidemiology, but so somebody who's a friend of the show did some work on this actually, and it turns out that there's all kinds of really cool linear algebra and differential equations together related stuff that you could do with graph theory. Graph theory meaning a bunch of nodes connected by arrows. You could also do spatial differential equations, and anything that could be modeled mathematically is going to be modeled by the world and is going to interact with diseases, so you could throw that into the theory too. Epidemiology will be around as long as communicable disease is around, whether it be physical, mental, or otherwise systemic to the tradition that is human culture. We made great strides in the last century, but this field is still ripe for new discoveries and creativity. I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Gabriel.
And this has been Breaking Math. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/breakingmathpodcast if you want to buy us a sandwich.
We are also on Twitter at Breaking Math Pod.
Facebook at facebook.com/breakingmathpodcast.
And Gmail at breakingmathpodcast@gmail.com.
You can check out our website that has a lot of different the widgets that you can look at, and we promise we'll update it soon.
Yes, that's true. Guilty as charged. Also, please send us your math-related questions. We'd love to start a question and answer segment that we'd love to get as cutting edge and as deep as possible.
Yeah, and for those of you who ordered the poster, if you haven't received them by the time the episode is out, they're in the mail.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.